In the grand, silent cathedral of the human psyche, there exists a hall of records unlike any found in the physical world. It is a place of cold marble and infinite echoes, where every thought is a vibration and every spoken word is etched into the very fabric of the atmosphere. Within this hall sits a massive iron-bound ledger. Its pages are not made of paper, but of a shimmering, translucent substance that captures the frequency of the soul. A woman stands before this ledger. The air around her is thick, heavy like cooling lead, pressing against her chest with the weight of 1,000 unfulfilled desires. Her hand, trembling with the fatigue of a decade of struggle, holds a pen carved from the bone of her own sacrifices. She prepares to sign her name beneath a sentence that has become her daily liturgy, her morning prayer, and her evening lamentation. I cannot afford this. As the nib of the pen touches the page, the world stops. Time itself seems to crystallize. The scratching of the ink sounds like the grinding of tectonic plates. In this frozen moment, a profound paradox is revealed. The woman believes she is merely describing a factual observation of her bank balance, a neutral report on the state of her reality. She thinks she is the victim of the ledger, but the invisible observer, the wise witness who has watched 1 billion souls stand at this same desk, sees the truth. The woman is not the victim, she is the author. The sentence she writes is not a description, it is a spiritual decree. It is a command issued to the living substance of the universe, a legal contract of lack that she unknowingly signs and renews with every breath. The leaden weight in the air is not the absence of money, it is the presence of the no she has commanded. The universe in its terrifying and perfect obedience is simply constructing the walls of the prison she has just designed. The ledger is not recording her life, it is receiving the blueprints for its continuation. To understand why the simple utterance of "I cannot afford this" carries the power to collapse a destiny, one must apply a rigorous deconstruction of the soul's architectural laws. We must ask, why does the universe respond with such literal finality to the human voice? The answer lies in the concept of the radio dial of consciousness. The human mind is not a passive receiver of reality, it is a broadcast station. Every word spoken is a frequency adjustment. When the phrase "I don't have enough" passes the lips, the dial is turned to the static of scarcity. This is not merely a psychological state, it is a quantum directive. Why is this a spiritual decree? Because the field of infinite potential, the raw, unformed substance from which all matter arises, possesses no judgment of its own. It is like the fertile soil of a garden. If a gardener plants nightshade and screams at the earth for roses, the earth remains unmoved. It simply fulfills the law of the seed. The words "I cannot" are the seeds of nightshade. They instruct the field to withhold its bounty because the speaker has declared there is no place to put it. How does this manifest as a contract of lack? Through the law of recursive thinking, we see that the mind seeks to prove its own declarations true. When the decree is signed, the subconscious mind becomes a master editor. It filters out opportunities, blinds the eyes to sudden supply, and deadens the intuition that would lead to the certain path. The mirror of reality cannot reflect back a palace if the woman standing before it is holding the blueprint of a shack. Psychologically, this creates what is known as the echo of the past. The individual hears the echo of their previous failures and mistakes them for the voice of God. They believe the shadow cast by their current circumstances is the only reality, forgetting that a shadow can only exist if there is a light behind them. To say "I cannot afford" is to turn one's back to the light and declare that the darkness is the only truth. It is a profound architectural error, the attempt to build a future using only the debris of the past. Consider the story of a woman named Clara, whose life had become a masterclass in the architecture of the void. It was a biting, snowy Tuesday in January, a day where the wind seemed to carry the very scent of frost and finality. Clara sat at her kitchen table, the only light provided by a dim, flickering overhead bulb that buzzed with the rhythm of an exhausted heart. Before her lay 2 screens. On her laptop was a final notice for a property tax bill, $1,142. On her phone was her banking app, displaying a balance that felt like a mocking grin, $14.62. For years, Clara had been a spiritual tourist. She had filled her shelves with gilded books on manifestation and spent her meager spare change on crystals that promised peace. She had whispered affirmations until they felt like hollow repetitions, like a beggar shouting at a king who had long since closed his windows. The hollow weight in her stomach was a familiar companion, a cold, leaden ball that sat where her power should have been. She lived in the voice of the dark. It whispered that she was failing, that she was alone, and that help was a myth told to children. Every time she looked at that $14.62, she would sigh a deep, visceral sound that signaled to the universe her total surrender to lack. That sigh was her signature on the contract. But on this particular Tuesday, something within the mechanism of Clara's soul snapped. It was not a break of despair, but a break of illusions. She looked at the tax bill, then at the banking app, and instead of the usual "I cannot," she felt a surge of "I will not." She walked to her hallway mirror, the mirror of truth. She did not see a victim. She saw a woman who had been using her godlike power to create a very detailed, very convincing hell. She looked past the fatigue in her eyes, past the gray story of debt, and found the spark. She realized that she had been a master weaver, but she had been weaving with threads of maybe and someday. With a quiet, fierce tenderness, she spoke. She did not shout at the universe. She spoke with the authority of a queen informing her court of a new law. She utilized the threefold command. She ceased the internal leak of her power. She stopped pleading with the law and started practicing it. She tore up the blueprint of the shack right there in the hallway. The result was not a manifestation in the way tourists think of it. It was a recalibration. 22 hours later, an old escrow account from a home she had sold 4 years prior, an account she had completely forgotten, an account that had been lost in the bureaucracy of the physical world, was flagged for payout. The check was cut and overnighted for exactly $6,800. The money didn't come to her. She had simply moved to the floor of the building, where the money was already waiting. To embody this truth today, one must recognize that they are currently standing before their own iron-bound ledger. The air you breathe is the unformed substance, and it is waiting for your instructions. The first act of the sovereign is to conduct a sanctuary audit. Look at your words over the past 24 hours. How many times have you signed the contract of lack? How many times have you allowed the ghost of logic to tell you what is possible? To change the architecture of your life, you must first stop the construction of the prison. You must make a silent, sacred vow to your own soul. From this second forward, you shall never again permit the sentence, "I cannot afford this," to pass your lips. Even if the banking app shows zero, even if the bills are stacked like a mountain, you do not describe the shadow, you command the light. As the listener feels their spine straighten and their breath deepen, they may find a quiet power in joining this circle of awakened souls. Subscribing to this sanctuary is the first act of the sovereign, an intentional choice to remain in the frequency of transformation. It is the declaration that you are no longer a tourist, but a permanent resident of your own power. When you refuse to speak the language of the grave, you create a vacuum, and the universe abhors a vacuum. By tearing up the old blueprint, you have cleared the ground. But a cleared ground is only the beginning. There is a secret substance, a golden mist, that permeates the very atoms of the room you are sitting in right now. It is the raw material of every check, every gold coin, and every sudden breakthrough. Most people walk through it their entire lives and never touch it because their hands are closed tight around their own poverty. In the next chapter, we shall learn how to open those hands. We will dive into the nature of this infinite substance and discover the specific rhythmic tuning fork that causes this mist to crystallize into solid form. The threshold has been crossed. The sovereign is waking. The bridge is set. The mist is rising. Are you ready to see what is hidden within the golden air? Imagine a traveler, parched and staggering through a desert of blinding white salt. His throat is a dry valley of dust. His eyes are clouded by the shimmering heat of 1,000 false horizons. He stumbles over a dune, collapsing into the sand, weeping for a single drop of moisture to save his life. To his perception, the world is a sterile void, a landscape defined entirely by what it lacks. He is a victim of the emptiness, a casualty of a world that has run dry. Yet, as the wise observer gazes upon this scene from the heights of a higher dimension, a staggering paradox is revealed. This traveler is not in a desert at all. He is submerged in a vast, invisible ocean of pure, crystalline water. The very air he breathes is saturated with the moisture he craves. The sand beneath him is merely a temporary condensation of a deeper fluid reality. He is dying of thirst in the middle of a deluge, simply because his eyes are tuned only to the frequency of solids, and his skin has forgotten how to absorb the invisible. This is the great tragedy of the human condition. The world is not a vault that has been locked against you. It is a fountain that has never stopped flowing. We walk through a golden mist of unformed substance every moment of our lives, the raw, vibrating material of all wealth, health, and opportunity. Yet we cry out in the darkness because our bank accounts appear empty. We mistake the shadow of the physical world for the light of the spiritual source. We look at a barren tree in winter and declare it dead, forgetting that the life force is currently gathering its sudden strength in the invisible roots, preparing for a harvest that the eyes cannot yet conceive. The universe is not a collection of objects to be gathered. It is an infinite, living substance that is always trying to flow to the lowest point of your need, held back only by the dams of your own disbelief. To understand the nature of this infinite substance, one must engage in a rigorous psychological and philosophical autopsy of reality itself. We must peel back the skin of the material world and ask the foundational question: why does the human mind perceive a recession in a universe that is inherently expanding? The recursive why, the root of perception. Why does the seeker feel like a beggar at the gates of plenty? It is because the human ego is a creature of the mirror. It looks at the reflection of its current circumstances, the unpaid bill, the declining sales, the missed opportunity, and it accepts that reflection as the ultimate truth. But how does this reflection come to be? Recursive thinking reveals that the external world is not a primary reality, it is an echo. When a person speaks into the canyon of their life, "I do not have enough," the canyon has no choice but to shout back, "Not enough." The seeker hears the echo and thinks it is a new voice, a fresh disaster, when it is merely the delayed response to their own broadcast. The psychological radio dial. The mind operates on a radio dial of frequency. On the lower bands, the static of scarcity dominates the airwaves. This is the frequency of the seeker. The one who believes abundance is a shy bird they must sneak up on and catch. Why is this a fallacy? Because you cannot catch what you already are. Abundance is not an acquisition, it is a recognition. Philosophical depth teaches us that God, the infinite intelligence, is not a provider who hands out checks from a distant office. God is the supply itself. The substance of the universe is not owned by the divine. It is the divine in a state of potential. How the substance obeys the command. How then does the unformed mist become the formed coin? It happens through the law of precipitation. Just as water vapor in the atmosphere becomes rain when it meets a specific temperature and a particle of dust, the infinite substance becomes sudden supply when it meets the certain frequency of a human mind that has ceased to doubt. The psychological error of the masses is the belief that seeing is believing. In the architecture of the soul, the law is reversed. Believing is seeing. To demand that the universe show you the money before you feel the wealth is like a person standing before a fireplace and saying, "Give me heat, and then I will give you wood." The infinite substance is perfectly obedient, but it is also perfectly literal. If you provide a blueprint of a shack made of someday and if only, the invisible forces will construct exactly that. They will not build you a palace while you are still drafting the walls of a prison. The deconstruction of lack, therefore, requires a total dismantling of the ghost of logic, which insists that the visible is the only reality. During the darkest days of the 1930s, when a global shroud of fear had descended upon the world, New York City was a landscape of gray shadows. The Great Depression was not merely an economic event. It was a psychological contagion. Men in fine wool coats stood in breadlines, their eyes downcast, their shoulders hunched in the posture of the defeated. The air was thick with the vibration of the line, a collective decree that the fountain had finally run dry. In a small, sunlit apartment overlooking a park, Florence Scovel Shinn sat with a group of women who refused to join the line. These women were not born into privilege. Many were seamstresses, teachers, and widows whose life savings had evaporated overnight. Yet, while the world spoke of drying up, these women spoke of the increase. Consider a woman named Eleanor. She was a pianist whose engagements had vanished as the cabarets and theaters shuttered. Her rent was 3 months in arrears, and her landlord, a man consumed by the ghost of logic, had given her 48 hours to vacate. Eleanor came to Florence in a state of high-voltage anxiety. She wanted to know how the money would come. She wanted to know when. She was a seeker, frantically trying to catch the shy bird of supply. Florence looked at her and said, "Eleanor, you are trying to manifest money as if it were outside of you. You are looking at the shadow and crying because it has no substance. But the shadow is only there because you are blocking the light. Stop shouting about the wall of Jericho and start walking as if it is already dust." Eleanor returned to her apartment. She did not go to the employment agency to beg for a job that didn't exist. Instead, she performed a pattern interruption. She took her last $5 money Rajic dictated should be saved for bread, and she went to a florist. She bought a single, magnificent white lily. As she walked home, she felt the trimmer of time whispering that she was a fool. But she held her head high, adopting the posture of the sovereign. She placed the lily on her piano and sat down to play, not a dirge of despair, but a concerto of triumph. She was signaling to the infinite substance that she was not a victim of the 1930s, but a citizen of the infinite. She was cleaning the vessel of her mind, making room for big, happy financial surprises. The next morning, at the 36th hour of her deadline, a knock came at the door. It was not the landlord. It was a representative of a wealthy estate. A recluse in the building had heard Eleanor playing through the walls for months. He was moving to his country estate and required a resident musician and librarian to oversee his collection. He offered her a salary that was triple her previous earnings, plus a suite of rooms. The job had been there the entire time. The recluse had been there. But Eleanor's frequency of not enough had made her invisible to the opportunity. She was on a different floor of the building. The moment she changed her internal radio dial by purchasing the lily, an act of sovereign wealth, she stepped into the elevator of consciousness and rose to the floor where the supply was waiting. To move from the state of the seeker to the state of the sovereign, you must begin to interact with the golden mist of the infinite substance today. This is not a mental exercise. It is a physical and spiritual integration. The sovereign mandate. The first step is to recognize that you are a gateway. The abundance you seek is not coming to you, it is coming through you. If the gateway is clogged with the debris of "I can't" and "it's hard," the substance remains in its unformed state. Practice the sanctuary of order. Spend 5 minutes today clearing a small space in your physical environment. This is the cleansing of the vessel. As you dust a shelf or organize a drawer, say silently, "I am making room for my divine supply. I am a capable steward of the infinite." When you treat your current environment with the respect of a queen, you prove to the law that you are ready for the palace. The quickening of the heart. Immediately after this act of order, find 3 scouts of abundance in your life right now. It could be the heat in your radiator, the shoes on your feet, or the coffee in your cup. These are the witnesses that the fountain is still flowing. If you cannot be grateful for the loaves you have, the universe cannot multiply them. Gratitude is the fast-forward button that collapses the time between the thought and the thing. As you stand in this new frequency, you will notice a hum in your spirit. It is the sound of the atoms in your room beginning to rearrange themselves. You have stopped the leak of your power. You have recognized the substance. But recognizing the substance is only the first part of the sovereign's journey. To truly command the mist to become matter, you must possess the master key, a specific rhythmic vibration that acts as a bridge between the invisible and the seen. Most people use words like dull stones, throwing them at the world and wondering why nothing changes. In the next chapter, we will unveil the threefold command of the divine supply. We will learn the exact words that act as a tuning fork for the quantum field, recalibrating the very atmosphere around you until the resources you require begin to move toward you before you have even finished the sentence. The sovereign has found the substance. Now, she must learn the command. The air is thick with potential. Can you feel the sudden rush of heat in your hands? The king is approaching the treasury. In a silent, vaulted chamber of a forgotten laboratory, a single crystal goblet sits atop a pedestal of black obsidian. To the naked eye, the goblet is an emblem of stillness, a cold and rigid monument of glass. Across the room, an invisible force prepares to strike. There is no hammer, no stone, and no physical hand to exert pressure. Instead, there is only a tuning fork, struck once against a velvet pad. The sound is a thin silver thread, a frequency so precise it seems to bypass the ears and vibrate within the very marrow of the bones. For a moment, nothing happens. The goblet remains indifferent. Then, a microscopic tremor begins at the rim. The vibration intensifies, not because the sound has grown louder, but because the glass has found its resonant match. Suddenly, with a violent, musical explosion, the goblet shatters into 1,000 diamonds. It did not break because of force. It broke because it could no longer maintain its rigid form in the presence of a superior frequency. This is the great paradox of the human struggle. Most souls attempt to shatter the glass ceiling of their poverty through the blunt force of labor, the screaming of affirmations into the wind, or the frantic hustle of the physical body. They believe that if they shout loud enough at the universe, the gates of the treasury will swing open. But the universe is deaf to the volume of the voice. It is only attuned to the frequency of the command, the glass of your current reality. The debt, the stagnation, the not enough cannot be broken by effort. It can only be dissolved by the introduction of a specific, rhythmic tuning fork that recalibrates the very atoms of the room. We stand now at the threshold of the most guarded secret of the master content architect, the threefold vibration that acts as the master key to the quantum field. To understand why the threefold command holds the power to rearrange physical matter, one must apply the discipline of recursive thinking. We must ask, why does the universe respond to a three-part decree, and how do these specific words bypass the ghost of logic? The first layer. Why the number 3? The human mind is a trinity of operation, the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious. When a command is issued in 3 parts, it acts as a triple lock mechanism. It satisfies the intellect, it saturates the emotional body, and it aligns with the spiritual law of manifestation. In the architecture of the soul, 3 is the number of the finished work. Just as length, width, and height create a physical object, the threefold vibration creates a psychological reality. The second layer, the anatomy of the words. We must deconstruct the specific adjectives, certain, sudden, and limitless. Certain. This is the antidote to the maybe frequency. Most prayers are phrased as please. They contain a microscopic leak of doubt. To say my supply is certain is to move the radio dial away from the static of hope and into the clear broadcast of law. Why is certainty required? Because the subconscious mind is a master of obedience. If you give it a perhaps, it builds a perhaps. If you give it certainty, it perceives a mandate that it cannot ignore. Sudden. This word targets the trimmer of time. The human ego believes that wealth must be grown slowly, through the grueling passage of linear days. The word sudden collapses the distance between the invisible thought and the physical form. It informs the quantum field that you are no longer willing to wait for the shadow to catch up to the light. How does this work? By signaling that the harvest is ready now, you bypass the logic that says you must suffer before you succeed. Limitless. This dissolves the container. Most people manifest within the boundaries of their current salary or their family's history. To command limitless supply is to step out of the blueprint of the shack and into the field of infinite potential. It reminds the soul that the golden mist has no bottom and no end. The third layer, the dissolution of the mirror. Recursive thinking reveals that the mirror of your current life only shows you what you were, not what you are. When you speak these words, you are not describing the reflection in the glass. You are informing the glass what it must now reflect. You are the cause. The world is the effect. By the time the sentence is finished, the echo of your old poverty has been silenced by the resonance of your new sovereignty. Consider the case of a woman named Elena. She lived in a modern city of glass and steel, yet her internal world was a landscape of ruins. Elena was a woman of high intellect and deep spiritual study, yet she found herself at a terrifying crossroads. Her business, a boutique architectural firm, had seen no new contracts in 6 months. Her radio dial was tuned to the constant static of, how will I pay the rent, and why is this happening to me? She had spent months shouting affirmations at her bank balance, but she was using the blunt force of the seeker. She was begging the universe for a miracle, which only served to reinforce the fact that she currently lacked one. She was standing before the mirror and crying because the reflection looked poor. One Tuesday evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyscrapers, Elena decided to stop the internal leak. She walked into her bathroom and stood before the vanity mirror. She did not look at the dark circles under her eyes or the stack of final notices on the counter. She looked directly into her own pupils, the divine spark. She took 3 slow, expansive breaths, imagining she was breathing in the raw, golden substance of the universe. She placed her left hand over her heart and her right hand over her solar plexus, the seat of power. Then, she spoke the threefold command, not as a request to a distant god, but as a decree of law. "My supply is certain," she breathed. She felt a sudden coolness in her palms. "My supply is sudden," she said, her voice growing firmer. The air in the small room seemed to thicken, becoming charged with an invisible electricity. "My supply is limitless," she commanded, letting the resonance of the word limitless vibrate in her chest. She repeated it 3 times, each time with a slight smile, as if she were sharing a beautiful secret with her own reflection. She did not check her email immediately after. She did not look at her banking app. She simply said, "It is finished," and walked away to make a cup of tea. She had sealed the seed in the soil. Less than 48 hours later, a notification chimed on her phone. It was an inquiry from a global developer she had pitched to 3 years prior, a project she had long ago filed under failure. The developer had experienced a sudden change in their board of directors, and the new chair had found Elena's old blueprints. They didn't just want a pitch, they wanted to sign her for the entire 5-year development. The contract was certain, the arrival was sudden, and the budget was, for all practical purposes, limitless. Elena had not attracted the contract. She had simply changed her frequency until she was no longer invisible to it. To embody this truth today, you must move beyond the role of the listener and into the role of the practitioner. The threefold decree is not a magic spell. It is a technical recalibration of your soul's architecture. The mirror ritual. Find a mirror where you can be undisturbed. Look past the shadow of your current fatigue and focus on the spark of the divine within your pupils. This spark is older than your debt and more powerful than any economic recession. Posture. Stand tall, rolling your shoulders back to open the vessel of your chest. The breath. Take 3 deep breaths, inhaling the golden mist and exhaling the gray stories of not enough. The command. Speak the words with the quiet confidence of a queen informing her realm of a new decree. Do not shout. Let the words vibrate. My supply is certain. My supply is sudden. My supply is limitless. The seal of the finished work. Once spoken, you must seal the seed. You do this by saying, "It is finished," and the results are now made manifest. This is the full stop at the end of your decree. It prevents you from digging up the seed to see if it is growing. Once the word is spoken with authority, the law takes over. Your only job now is to remain in the frequency of the finished result. If you feel a hum in your spirit right now, a sense that this is not a random encounter but a divine appointment, then I invite you to join this circle of awakened sovereigns. Subscribing to this channel is not mere consumption. It is the establishment of a sanctuary for your ongoing transformation. We are building a community of women who no longer ask for permission to be abundant, but who dictate the terms of their own reality. As you step away from the mirror, you must be prepared. The field has received your command, but the physical world is a delayed echo. Between the command and the manifestation, you will encounter the sanctuaries of presence, the physical anchors that keep your frequency from slipping back into the static. Most fail because they speak the word but do not know how to hold the posture. In the next chapter, we will explore the sanctuaries of presence. We will uncover the 3 amplifiers that ground this truth into your physical reality. Without these, the words are just sounds. With them, the words are power. We shall discuss the posture of the sovereign, the cleansing of the vessel, and the quickening of the heart. The command has been issued, the atoms are moving. Now, we must prepare the house for the guest who is already at the door. Imagine, if you will, a master artisan attempting to pour molten incandescent gold into a vessel made of unbaked clay. The gold is pure, a liquid sun harvested from the very heart of the primordial furnace. It is the raw substance of value, heavy with the weight of infinite potential. But as the stream touches the vessel, the clay, frail, damp, and structurally unsound, begins to hiss and crumble. The vessel does not hold the wealth. It dissolves under the heat of it. The gold is not lost, for gold is eternal, but it flows through the cracks in the floorboards, disappearing into the dark earth because it had no sanctuary capable of containing its majesty. This is the great paradox of the spiritual life. The universe is constantly trying to pour its big, happy financial surprises into the lives of the seekers, but the seekers have forgotten how to be vessels. They speak the words of power, they chant the threefold command, yet they do so while inhabiting a collapsed vessel. They stand with hunched shoulders, their eyes fixed upon the dust of the earth, their physical environments a chaotic tapestry of half-finished chores and hoarded relics of past failures. They are like kings who sit in the dirt of a cellar, wearing rags and shouting at the ceiling that they are royalty. The ceiling does not answer, not because it is deaf, but because the frequency of royalty requires a throne. The throne is not a piece of furniture. It is a state of physical and environmental presence. We must understand that the divine supply is high-voltage electricity. If the copper wires of your daily existence are frayed, if the insulators of your habits are cracked, the power cannot reach the city of your dreams. It will merely blow the fuses of your nervous system, leaving you in a deeper darkness than before. To receive the infinite, one must first prepare the sanctuary. To master the architecture of the soul, one must move beyond the magic spell mentality and enter the realm of vibrational engineering. We must apply the method of recursive thinking to the physical form and ask the foundational question: why does the state of a woman's spine or the contents of her junk drawer dictate the flow of the divine current? The recursive why. The nervous system as the antenna. Why does the posture of the sovereign matter? It is because the body is not a separate entity from the spirit. It is the most dense manifestation of the spirit's current frequency. When a woman hunches her shoulders and shields her solar plexus, she is physically broadcasting a defense posture. How does this affect supply? Recursive logic reveals that a defense posture is an admission of fear. Fear is the frequency of I am being hunted by lack. If the body tells the subconscious mind that it is under attack, the subconscious mind shuts down the creative faculties of the superconscious. It enters survival mode. In survival mode, the radio dial is locked onto the lowest frequency, the static of the neighbor's shadow. You cannot perceive sudden opportunities when your biological antenna is tuned only to danger. By forcing the body into the posture of a queen, shoulders back, chest open, crown pulled toward the stars, you bypass the ego's fear and force the nervous system to broadcast safety and sovereignty. Supply only flows where it is safe to land. The philosophy of the vessel. Why order is law? Why does cleansing the vessel, the environment, trigger manifestation? The universe operates on the principle of stewardship. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that God cannot pour new wine into a cluttered cup. How does this function psychologically? Every object in your physical environment carries a vibrational attachment. That stack of unpaid bills on the counter is an echo of debt. That closet full of clothes you no longer wear is a hoarding of the past, which signals to the law that you do not trust the future to provide new garments. When you clear one small area, a nightstand, a drawer, a passenger seat, you are performing a micro-ritual of order. You are informing the quantum field that you are a capable administrator of space. Wealth recognizes the vibration of order. Chaos is a repellent to the divine current. Order is the insulator that allows the high-voltage supply to be channeled without grounding out into the dirt of distraction. The quickening of the heart. The fast, forward button. Why is gratitude called the quickening? Because most people wait for the total manifestation before they offer thanks. They believe gratitude is a reaction to a result. But in the cinematic manuscript of the soul, gratitude is the cause. How does it accelerate time? When you find 3 scouts of abundance in your current reality, the heat in the walls, the water in the tap, you are shifting your radio dial from waiting to having. Waiting is a frequency of distance, having is a frequency of presence. Gratitude acts as a gravitational pull, drawing the sudden supply out of the infinite mist and into the physical mirror. It is the bridge of the heart that connects the invisible thought to the physical form. As you reflect on the state of your own vessel, the posture you hold as you listen, and the environment that surrounds you, realize that this moment is a divine appointment. This is not mere content. It is a sanctuary for your transformation. If you feel the truth of these laws vibrating in your spirit, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and join this circle of awakened women. By doing so, you are not just following a creator, you are claiming your seat at the table of sovereigns, ensuring that the frequency of overflow remains your daily broadcast. Consider the story of Adelaide, a woman of profound talent who lived in a state of perpetual leaking. Adelaide was a restorer of ancient tapestries, a woman who understood the language of threads, yet her own life was a frayed mess. She lived in a small, sun-drenched studio in a historic district, but the sunlight only served to illuminate the piles of someday projects, the dust on her neglected ledgers, and the echoes of a failed partnership that she kept tucked away in boxes under her bed. Adelaide had mastered the threefold command. She spoke it every morning. She looked into her mirror and whispered, "My supply is certain." Yet by noon, she would find herself hunched over her work table, her neck strained, her breath shallow, and her mind racing with the trimmer of time. She was shouting at the ceiling while sitting in the dirt. Her divine supply seemed to be perpetually just around the corner, a shy bird that never quite landed. One rainy Monday, Adelaide stopped. She looked at her reflection in the glass of a framed tapestry and saw not a restorer, but a collapsed vessel. She realized she was asking the universe for a palace while living in a self-made warehouse of ghosts. She began the sanctuary of presence. She did not try to fix her entire life at once. She started with her work table. She cleared every scrap of thread, every rusted needle, and every lingering shadow of a half-finished job. She wiped the wood until it shone. This was her cleansing of the vessel. She was signaling to the law that she had room for the new. Then she stood in the center of the room. She rolled her shoulders back, feeling the silver thread pulling her crown toward the rafters. She breathed into her solar plexus, the seat of power. For 5 minutes, she simply was the queen of that studio. This was the posture of the sovereign. She stopped being a victim of her mounting bills and became the authority over her space. Finally, she practiced the quickening. She looked at the rain hitting the window and felt a surge of gratitude for the roof over her head. She felt the warmth of the tea in her mug. She thanked the universe for the scouts of abundance, the 3 small commissions that were already on her desk. She stopped grumbling that they weren't big enough and blessed them as the vanguard of the king's treasury. That afternoon, as she sat in her ordered vessel, the phone rang. It was the curator of a prestigious museum in a distant city. They were embarking on a 10-year restoration of a royal collection and had been looking for someone who understood the soul of the fabric. The curator remarked, "I don't know why, Adelaide, but when I saw your name on my list today, it felt inevitable. Your presence, even over the phone, feels like someone who can handle the weight of this history." The museum didn't find Adelaide. Adelaide had finally become visible to the museum. Her frequency of order and sovereignty had pierced through the fog of fatigue that had previously shrouded her. She had built the throne, and the king had no choice but to send the treasury. To embody the sanctuaries of presence today, you must move from the mental to the visceral. The infinite substance is waiting for a vessel that will not crumble. The practice of the 3 sanctuaries. The posture of the sovereign. Throughout this day, every time you catch yourself leaking hunched over your phone, looking down at the pavement, or shielding your chest stop, roll your shoulders back. Imagine the silver thread. Breathe as if you have already received the $6,800 check. You are not a seeker, you are an heir. The cleansing of the vessel. Choose one sanctuary of order. Do not clean the whole house. Spend 10 minutes on your nightstand, your junk drawer, or your wallet. Remove the echoes of the past. Dispose of old receipts, dead pens, and scraps of paper. Make physical room for the sudden supply. The quickening of the heart. Before you sleep, name 3 things that are evidence of supply in your life right now. Do not look for miracles. Look for the loaves. The electricity, the running water, the blankets on your bed. Bless them. As you bless them, you press the fast-forward button on the manifestation of your limitless supply. When you align the body and the environment with the decree, you create a closed circuit of power. The golden mist of the universe no longer flows past you. It begins to crystallize within your experience. But be warned, as you begin to ground this power, the clock of the soul begins to tick. You are entering the most sacred and dangerous part of the architect's journey. You have prepared the vessel, you have spoken the command, and now you must enter the 7-2-hour Trinity Window. This is the 3-day cycle where the seed meets the soil and the shadows attempt their final rebellion. In the next chapter, we will discuss the 7-2, our Trinity Window. We will learn why the number 3 is the mathematical code of manifestation and how to navigate the specific power moments of these 72 hours. You are moving into the quickening. The vessel is ready, the command is vibrating. The clock starts now. Beneath a sky of bruised violet and deepening indigo, there lies a field that has known only the bitter taste of drought for a generation. The earth is cracked, a map of dry canyons and thirsty fissures, whispering of a long-forgotten rain. In the center of this desolation stands a gardener. He does not carry a bucket of water, nor does he look at the clouds with the pleading eyes of a beggar. In his palm rests a single glowing seed, an ember of pure, concentrated light that seems to pulse with the rhythm of a distant sun. The gardener kneels. With deliberate, reverent motions, he presses the seed into the parched soil. He covers it with the dust of the old world, patting the earth smooth until the surface looks exactly as it did moments before, barren, gray, and lifeless. To the casual observer, the man has performed an act of madness. He has buried his only treasure in a grave of sand. There is no sprout to be seen, no moisture in the air, and no green promise on the horizon. The world remains stubbornly, aggressively the same. Yet, here lies the great cinematic paradox of the soul's architecture. The moment the seed is covered is the moment the old world ends. The surface of the field is now a magnificent lie. Beneath the crust of the visible, a molecular revolution has begun. The seed has issued a command to the atoms of the earth, and the earth has no choice but to respond. The gardener does not check for fruit an hour later. He does not dig up the seed to see if it has sprouted. He understands that the invisible work is the only work. He walks away with the posture of the sovereign, knowing that while the shadow of the desert still remains, the light of the harvest is already a mathematical certainty. The first 24 hours are not about the appearance of the flower, but about the total surrender of the soil to the new blueprint. To navigate the 7-2, our Trinity Window, one must first submit to a rigorous deconstruction of the clock of the spirit. We must apply the method of recursive thinking to the very concept of time and ask, why must the sovereign commit to a 3-day cycle, and what occurs within the first day that dictates the success of the entire harvest? The recursive why, the Trinity of manifestation. Why the number 3? Throughout the history of the esoteric and the psychological, the number 3 represents the union of mind, body, and spirit, the threefold cord that cannot be easily broken. In the architecture of the soul, the first 24 hours are dedicated to the mind. This is the phase of the word. Just as a master architect must first finalize the blueprint before the first stone is laid, the seeker must finalize the mental blueprint before the supply can crystallize. How does this function within the subconscious? The subconscious mind is a garden that has been overrun by the weeds of not enough for decades. These weeds have deep, fibrous roots made of old conversations, parental warnings, and the ghost of logic. You cannot simply plant a new idea and expect it to flourish instantly. You must saturate the soil. Day 1 is the day of total saturation. It is a psychological blitzkrieg. By repeating the threefold command, certain, sudden, limitless, with relentless rhythm, you are not trying to convince the universe. You are overriding the no signal. You are drowning out the static of scarcity on your internal radio dial until the only broadcast remaining is the frequency of the divine supply. The philosophy of the seed. The death of the old story. Why is the seed buried? Recursive logic teaches us that for a new reality to be born, the old reality must be allowed to die. In the first 24 hours, the sovereign must practice a radical form of blindness. One must look at the bank account, the unpaid bill, or the empty calendar, and see them as shadows of the past light that left a star 1,000,000 years ago and is only now reaching the eyes. They are not current events. They are echoes. How do we prevent ourselves from digging up the seed? This is the role of the superconscious. By anchoring the mind in the command, we prevent the tremor of time from inducing panic. Panic is the act of digging up the seed to see if it's growing. Day 1 requires the quiet knowing of a master. You are establishing the law of the finished work. If you speak the command and then check your phone every 5 minutes for a notification, You have not planted a seed, you have merely thrown a stone. To plant truly is to release. You must inform the quantum field of its new marching orders and then step back, allowing the living substance to begin its mysterious assembly. In the high mountain valleys of a distant kingdom, there lived a woman named Julian, known as the Weaver of the Hidden Green. The valley was plagued by a drought of the spirit, where the people believed that wealth was a finite resource that could only be hoarded, never created. Their fields were gray, and their hearts were grayer. Julian was given a task by the High Architect to manifest a garden of golden wheat in the middle of a frozen winter. The people laughed. They pointed to the frost on the windows and the ghost of logic in the ledgers of the town. "It is not the season," they whispered. "The supply is dry." Julian ignored the shadow. On the first day, she went into the center of the town square and drew a circle in the frozen dirt. She stood within it, assuming the posture of the sovereign. She did not beg the sky for warmth. Instead, she began to whisper the threefold command. She whispered it as she walked to the well. She whispered it as she ate her meager bread. She whispered it as she looked into her own mirror. To the townspeople, she seemed to be talking to a ghost. But Julian was not talking to a ghost. She was talking to the atoms. She was saturating the soil of her own mind. She understood that her only job on this first day was to make the new blueprint so loud that she could no longer hear the old echoes of poverty. A neighbor came to her, carrying a bill of debt that Julian owed for the winter's wood. "The wood is gone, and the money is not here," the neighbor grumbled. "How can you speak of wheat when you cannot even pay for the warmth?" Julian looked at the neighbor, not with anger, but with the fierce tenderness of a queen. She blessed the bill. She silently said, "This returns to me 1,000-fold from the storehouse of the divine." She did not allow her radio dial to slip back into the static of, "I cannot afford this." She held the certainty. She treated the neighbor as a scout of abundance, sent to test the strength of her seed. By the end of the first day, the wood was still gone, the dirt was still frozen, and the wheat was nowhere to be seen. But Julian went to sleep with a smile. The internal shift had occurred. She had successfully overridden the no signal. In the invisible realm, the golden mist had already begun to thicken around her. She had won the battle of the first 24 hours because she had refused to let the mirror of the world tell her who she was. To embark on your day one, you must treat the next 24 hours as a sacred laboratory. The world will try to present you with evidence of lack. Your task is to remain unmoved, acting as the master architect who knows the building is already complete on the blueprint. The rituals of the first 24 hours. The doorway ritual, threshold moments. Every time you walk through a physical doorway today, whether it is your bedroom, your car, or a grocery store, silently decree, "I am walking into my divine supply. My supply is certain. My supply is sudden. My supply is limitless." Doorways are ancient symbols of transition. Use them to turn every mundane movement into an arrival at abundance. The current ritual, water as a conductor. Whenever you are near running water, washing your hands, taking a shower, or drinking, repeat the command. Water is a conductor of frequency. Let the water carry the resonance of the command into your cellular memory. Feel the abundance washing over the shadows of your past. The saturation command. If the ghost of logic speaks, if a bill arrives or a doubt rises, do not fight it. Simply turn up the volume of the command. Say it until the words lose their meaning and become a hum in your nervous system. You are saturating the soil. As you begin this 7-2-hour journey, remember that you are not alone. You are part of a community of sovereigns who are all, in this moment, reclaiming their divine inheritance. If you understand that the act of sowing is the first step of the harvest, consider supporting this sanctuary through the Super Thanks button. This is not a payment. It is a signal to the law that you have enough to share, which immediately triggers the law to give you more to distribute. The first day is nearing its end. The seed is planted, the soil is saturated, you have successfully held the line against the old story. But as the sun sets on day one, a new challenge arises. The quantum field is beginning to react, and with that reaction comes the testing of the metal. In the next chapter, we enter day 2, the Valley of Shadows. This is the most critical period of the 7-2-hour window. It is the day when the weeds of the past make their final, desperate attempt to choke the sprout. We will discuss the 7 shadows of resistance and how to remain unmoved by appearances when the world seems to be shouting no louder than ever. The seed is in the dark, the quickening has begun. Stay in your sovereignty. The shadows are coming, but they are only ghosts. The second day begins not with the fanfare of trumpets, but with a silence so profound it feels predatory. It is the hour of the gray mist, where the initial intoxication of the sacred vow has evaporated, leaving behind the cold, damp reality of the waiting room. If day 1 was the fiery ignition of the rocket, day 2 is the moment it leaves the atmosphere, a period of violent friction where the heat of resistance threatens to melt the hull of the seeker's resolve. Imagine a lone ship navigating a sea of obsidian glass under a sky devoid of stars. The compass appears broken. The wind has died. The destination is a memory that feels increasingly like a fever dream. To the physical eyes, nothing has changed. The water is still dark, the horizon is still distant, and the hull still creaks with the weight of old burdens. This is the day of the shadow, a cinematic paradox where the closer the soul moves toward its sudden manifestation, the more aggressively the world seems to broadcast nothing. It is a sensory desert. The mind, starved for the sugar of external validation, begins to devour itself. The ghost of logic returns, not as a whisper, but as a roaring gale of practicality, pointing to the bank ledger and the ticking clock with a mocking finger. The traveler feels silly, an actor on a stage where the audience has already left. Yet, in the architecture of the divine, this silence is the most active of forces. It is the void before the word. It is the moment when the unformed substance is at its most malleable, precisely because the old structures have been dissolved and the new have not yet hardened into the visible. The observer knows that the storm is not a sign of failure, but a sign of the system's desperate attempt to maintain the status quo. The Valley of Shadows is not where the dream dies. It is where the debtor is buried so the sovereign can rise. To survive the second day of the 7-2-hour Trinity Window, one must subject the nature of resistance to a rigorous, recursive autopsy. We must look into the dark heart of the shadow and ask, why does the world seem to grow more difficult the moment we commit to the law of supply? The recursive why, the death throes of the ego. Why does the ghost of logic haunt the first 18 hours of day 2? Because the ego is the guardian of the known. To the ego, the blueprint of the shack is safety, even if it is a prison. When the sovereign issues the threefold command, they are not merely asking for money. They are attempting an ontological coup. They are trying to overthrow the identity of the lack-filled self. How does the mind respond to this threat? It produces chemicalization, a term Florence Scovel Shinn used to describe the mental and emotional upheaval that occurs when the high frequency of the divine meets the low frequency of old belief. It is like pouring pure, boiling water into a muddy cup. The mud does not vanish instantly. It swirls. It clouds the water. It makes the cup look dirtier than it was before the cleaning began. Recursive thinking reveals that the shadow is not an external obstacle. It is the echo of your own old broadcast hitting the walls of the new reality. The 7 shadows of resistance. We must analyze the specific distortions that appear in the radio dial during these critical hours. The ghost of logic. This is the demand for the how. It insists that spirit is a fantasy and that practicality is the only God. The trimmer of time. This creates a frantic high cortisol urgency. It whispers that if the supply does not arrive by noon, all is lost. The shadow of the neighbor. This triggers the mirror of comparison. It shows you someone else's success to make your own command feel futile. The fog of fatigue. A sudden, heavy lethargy that makes the practice of the command feel like an impossible chore. Why are these shadows necessary? They are the friction required for the quickening. Just as a muscle must be stressed to grow, the faith muscle must be tested by appearances. If you only believe when the sun is shining, you are not a sovereign, you are a tourist. To remain unmoved by appearances is to prove to the subconscious mind that you no longer value the shadow over the substance. The philosophy of the void. How do we hold the frequency when the eyes see nothing? By understanding that the mirror of the physical world has a latency period, it is a slow-moving reflection. What you see today is the echo of what you thought yesterday. If you react to the lack you see today, you are merely re-signing the old contract. To break the cycle, you must look through the shadow, as if it were a pane of smoked glass, and see the finished result glowing on the other side. You must act as the master content architect who knows that once the render has begun, the final image is inevitable, regardless of how long the screen remains black. In the bustling, soot-stained heart of New York City during the Great Depression, there lived a woman named Isabella. She was a master of the needle, a seamstress who had spent 40 years weaving the dreams of others into silk and wool. But as the world's radio dial turned to the static of the breadline, Isabella found herself a victim of the mirror of time. Her eyesight was failing. Her fingers, once nimble as a hummingbird's wings, were stiff with the fog of fatigue. Every morning she walked to the garment factory with a posture of defeat, her shoulders hunched against the biting wind. Her internal broadcast was a relentless dirge. I am too slow. I am too old. The world has passed me by. I will be the next to be cast out. The law, being perfectly obedient, eventually delivered the echo of her decree. Her foreman, a man whose heart had been hardened by the ghost of logic, called her into his office. Isabella, he said, not looking at her, we are downsizing. Your pace has dropped. We need younger, faster hands. Today is your final day. Isabella walked into the snow, the trimmer of time screaming in her ears. She had exactly enough money for 1 week of rent and 3 days of soup. She felt like a seeker who had finally been abandoned by the supply. She sought out the counsel of the wise observer, who told her, Isabella, you have been a master weaver of your own poverty. You have draped yourself in a garment of fear, and the universe has simply provided the matching accessories. Now, we shall weave a different garment. She was given the threefold command and instructed to enter her own 7-2-hour Trinity Window. The first day, the seed. Isabella sat in her small, cold room and planted the word. My supply is certain. My supply is sudden. My supply is limitless. She said it until her throat was dry. She spoke it into her morning tea. She was saturating the soil. The second day, the shadow. This was the day the weeds rose to choke her. She woke up with a fever. Her radiator clanked and died. A letter arrived from her sister, begging for money Isabella did not have. This was the great silence. No job offers came. No miracles appeared. The ghost of logic told her to go back to the factory and beg for her old, low-paying job. But Isabella remembered the sanctuary of presence. She stood in the center of her room and rolled her shoulders back. She cleared the clutter from her sewing table until the wood shone like a mirror of order. She looked at the snow outside and found 3 things to bless: the roof above her, the strength in her heart, and the divine spark in her eyes. She refused to recant. When the echo of the past told her she was a beggar, she whispered, I am a sovereign of supply. The 7th day, the result. On the morning of the 3rd cycle, an exchange moment occurred. A woman, Isabella, had made a single wedding dress for 10 years prior. A woman who had since moved to the highest circles of society tracked her down. The woman was opening a high-end boutique, and she did not want fast, young hands. She wanted a master who understood the soul of the fabric. She offered Isabella a salary that was triple what the factory had paid, with a sunlit studio and a contract that was limitless in its potential. Isabella didn't find the job. The job was always there, vibrating in the infinite mist. But Isabella's old frequency of not enough had made her invisible to it. She had been on the basement floor of consciousness. By remaining unmoved during the day of the shadow, she had stepped into the elevator of the spirit and risen to the penthouse of her own manifestation. To navigate your own day too, you must become a spiritual sentinel. You must guard the vessel of your mind against the 7 shadows with the fierce authority of a guardian. The discipline of the sovereign, the blessing of the bill. If an echo of debt arrives today, a bill, an unexpected expense, or a reminder of lack, do not sigh. A sigh is a command for more poverty. Instead, place your hand upon it and say, I bless this evidence of exchange. My supply is certain, and this returns to me 1,000-fold from the storehouse of the divine. Pushing through the fog. When the fog of fatigue hits, when you feel silly or exhausted by the practice, this is the sign that the old identity is dying. Do not stop. This is the moment to double the frequency of your command. Speak it aloud. Let the resonance vibrate in the room. The shield of silence. Do not discuss your 7-2-hour window with anyone who dwells in the ghost of logic. Their doubt will act as a grounding wire, draining the electricity from your command. Keep your seed in the sacred dark of your own heart. As you stand in the great silence of your second day, know that the current is moving beneath the surface. You are building the internal power that will eventually shatter the glass of your current reality. If this sanctuary has provided you with the strength to hold your line, consider subscribing. We are the community of the unmoved, the women who know that the shadow is the last gasp of the old world before the new one dawns. The clock is ticking. You have survived the valley of shadows. You have refused to dig up the seed. You have remained the sovereign, even when the world treated you as a seeker. The chemicalization is almost complete. The atoms have been rearranged. But as the 48th hour approaches, and the light of the third day begins to peek over the horizon, a final mysterious phenomenon occurs. It is the great silence, the moment just before the sun breaks, where all signs disappear, and the soul is asked to believe in the invisible one last time. In the next chapter, we enter Day 3, the quickening of the harvest. We will learn how to recognize the scouts of abundance, how to handle the sudden arrival of the king's treasury, and what to do when the mirror finally reflects the glory you have commanded. The shadows are retreating. The 72nd hour is calling. Can you feel the quickening in the air? There is a precise, breathless moment just before the sun breaks the horizon, where the world exists in a state of absolute suspension. The stars have faded into a pale, ghostly lavender, yet the light has not yet claimed the land. It is the hour of the void, where the temperature drops to its lowest point and the wind holds its breath. To the uninitiated, this is the coldest, darkest part of the journey, the moment when it feels most as though the sun has forgotten its promise. But to the master architect, this is the great silence, the final atmospheric compression before the sudden expansion of the dawn. Imagine a massive, prehistoric dam holding back an ocean of liquid gold. For 72 hours, the structure has groaned under an invisible pressure. On the first day, the cracks were internal, unseen by the eye. On the second day, the stone began to weep, and the ghost of logic whispered that the dam was too strong, the water too distant. But now, in the final hours of the third cycle, the frequency of the water and the frequency of the stone have reached a point of perfect resonance. There is no more struggle, no more tension, only a quiet, inevitable click. Suddenly, the air itself seems to change its molecular weight. The scent of ozone and blooming jasmine rises from the dry earth. A bird calls not a plea for the sun, but a proclamation of its arrival. This is the quickening, the cinematic paradox where the harvest begins precisely when the seeker has finally surrendered the need to see it. The seed, which has been dying in the dark soil for 2 days, has undergone a total transubstantiation. It is no longer a seed, it is a force of nature. It has pierced the crust of the visible, and what was once an invisible thought is now an inexorable form. The radio dial is no longer searching, it has found the broadcast. The mirror is no longer reflecting the past, it is birthing the future. To master the final hours of the 7-2-hour Trinity Window, one must apply a rigorous, recursive autopsy to the physics of the sudden. We must look past the shadow of the clock and ask the foundational question, why does the manifestation wait until the final cycle? And what occurs within the soul at the 72nd hour that shatters the old reality? The recursive why, the completion of the Trinity. Why the third day? In the architecture of the divine, the number 3 is the mathematical seal of manifestation. Day 1 was the domain of the mind, the planting of the blueprint. Day 2 was the domain of the spirit, the tempering of faith in the furnace of resistance. Day 3 is the domain of the body, the crystallization of the frequency into physical matter. Recursive thinking reveals that the universe cannot deliver the sudden supply until the seeker's nervous system can handle the voltage of the result. If the wealth arrived while the soul was still vibrating in anxiety, the power would blow the fuses of the vessel. The delay is not a denial, it is a vibrational calibration. By the morning of the third day, the weeds of doubt have been exhausted. The sovereign has stood unmoved by appearances for long enough that the subconscious mind finally accepts the new command as the only reality. The philosophy of the sudden. How does the sudden arrival work? The human ego believes in linear progression, the idea that $1 must become $2 and $2 must become $3. But the infinite substance operates on the law of quantum leaps. Why does it feel sudden? Because the invisible weaving has been happening behind the veil for the entire 7 2-hour window. The phone call that arrives at the 70th hour is not a random event. It is the final result of 1,000 invisible atoms being rearranged since the moment the command was first spoken. The sudden is merely the moment the delayed echo finally hits the ear. Philosophically, the third day is the moment where faith is no longer a verb, it becomes a noun. You are no longer trying to believe. You simply know. This quiet knowing is the exact frequency required to pull the supply out of the mist and into the mirror. The recognition of the scouts. Why does the universe send small witnesses first? Before the king's treasury arrives, the law sends scouts of abundance the forgotten $5 bill, a spontaneous gift, a sudden hunch. How we greet these scouts dictates the size of the harvest. Recursive logic suggests that if you that if you grumble at a small manifestation, you are informing the law that you do not value its currency. You are turning the radio dial back to not enough. But if you greet the $5 bill with the same majesty you would a $5,000 check, you tell the law that you are a capable steward of the infinite. You signal that the vessel is open, and the law responds by opening the floodgates. Consider the story of Samuel, a man who lived in a world of blueprints and landscapes, yet whose own life had become a barren dust bowl. Samuel was a landscape architect, a man whose hands knew how to make the earth sing. But his business had been struck by a drying up of contracts that defied all logic. Samuel sat in his studio, surrounded by the echoes of past projects. His drafting table was covered in the shadows of unpaid bills. He was down to his last few $100s, and the ghost of logic was whispering that he should close his doors and find a practical job in a hardware store. He was a seeker who was tired of the hunt. But Samuel decided to commit to the 7-2-hour Trinity Window. Day 1. The seed. He stood before his office mirror and spoke the threefold command. My supply is certain. My supply is sudden. My supply is limitless. He did not look at his empty inbox. He spent the day acting as the sovereign. He organized his drafting tools, sharpened his pencils, and cleansed the vessel of his workspace. He was signaling to the infinite substance that he was ready for a project of limitless scale. Day 2. The shadow. The resistance hit with a violent force. He received a rejection letter for a municipal project he had spent months pitching. It was a minus in the world of appearances. His heart raced, and the trimmer of time told him to panic. But Samuel remembered the sanctuary of presence. He stood tall, rolled his shoulders back, and whispered, "That project was not my divine place. My supply is certain. Something better is seeking me." He refused to recant. He stayed in the great silence, holding the word when his eyes saw nothing but an empty mailbox. Day 3. The harvest. At the 62nd hour, a great silence fell over his office. No emails, no calls. The fog of fatigue tried to settle in, but Samuel chose to go for a walk. He used the doorway ritual as he left his office, decreeing, "I am walking into my divine supply." While walking, he found a shiny new dime on the pavement, a scout of abundance. Most would have ignored it, but Samuel picked it up, polished it against his sleeve, and said, "Thank you, Father, for the scout of my overflow. I recognize the current." At the 71st hour, his phone rang. It was not the municipal board he had expected. It was a private developer for a multi-year project, a botanical park for a new tech campus. The project had been stuck in probate for 4 years and had suddenly been cleared that very morning. The developer hadn't even looked at other architects. They had seen an old sketch of Samuel's in a magazine years prior and had the hunch to call him that day. The contract didn't just pay his bills. It established his career for the next decade. Samuel didn't hustle for that contract. His frequency had become a match for it the moment he refused to let the rejection of Day 2 define his reality. He had moved from the basement of lack to the penthouse of supply, and the project was simply waiting for him on that floor. To embody the Day 3 quickening today, you must prepare for the sudden with the expectant eyes of a child on the morning of a great festival. You have moved through the planting and the shadows. Now, you must act as the receiver. The discipline of the harvest. Watch for the scouts. Throughout this day, look for the small witnesses, a forgotten coupon, a compliment from a stranger, a green light when you are in a rush. Do not dismiss them. Pick up every coin you find. Each one is a test of stewardship. Bless it and say, The king is approaching. I recognize the scouts of my abundance. The "it is finished" seal. Every time you think of your need today, do not speak the command again as if you are starting over. Instead say, "It is finished. My supply is made manifest." This protects the seed. It prevents you from digging it up with anxiety. You are now in the post-manifestation frequency. The hunch action. If you feel a sudden hunch to call someone, go somewhere, or clear a specific space, do it immediately. These are the current moments. The universe is rearranging the furniture of your life, and your physical movement is the final click that allows the supply to enter. You are standing at the threshold of your reclamation. The 7-2-hour window is sealing. If you have felt the shift in the atmosphere of your own room during this teaching, I invite you to declare your sovereignty. Leave a comment below. I am a sovereign of supply. My harvest is now manifest. This is your physical signature on the new contract. By typing these words, you move the energy from the internal to the external. The 72nd hour is here. The mirror is beginning to change. The sudden arrival is imminent. But as the supply begins to flow, a new and profound law is revealed. Many can attract supply, but few know how to circulate it. There is a hidden alchemy in the act of paying a bill, in the act of giving, and in the movement of money that determines if the fountain stays open or if it clogs once more. In the next chapter, we explore Chapter 8, The Alchemy of Exchange. We will learn how to turn the pain of paying into the power of multiplying. We will discover why a sigh is a command for lack, and how a blessing can turn a single dollar into a 1,000-fold return. The king has arrived at the gates. The treasury is open. Now, let us learn the language of the royal exchange. In the bustling, celestial marketplace of human experience, a woman stands before a vendor of light. In her hand, she holds a single golden coin, heavy with the weight of her labor and the sweat of her brow. To her physical eyes, this coin represents her survival. It is the bread for her table, the fuel for her hearth, the very boundary between her and the abyss of lack. As she extends her arm to pay, a visceral contraction seizes her chest. Her fingers tighten around the gold. Her breath hitches in a silent, jagged sigh. To her, this is a moment of loss. She is watching her life force diminish, watching a piece of her supply vanish into the pocket of another. But here is the majestic paradox. The moment she releases the coin with a sigh of regret, the gold turns to lead in the vendor's hand, and the mirror of her reality darkens. By mourning the departure of the gold, she has issued a command of lack to the atoms of the universe. She has signaled to the infinite substance that she is a creature of finite resources, and the universe, perfectly, terrifyingly obedient, immediately begins to constrict the flow of her future supply. Now, observe the same scene through the eyes of the sovereign. A second woman approaches. She holds an identical coin, yet as she releases it, her hand begins to glow with an incandescent violet light. She does not sigh. She smiles. She breathes into her solar plexus, and as the gold leaves her palm, she whispers a silent blessing. In her vision, she is not spending a limited resource. She is circulating a divine current. As the coin touches the vendor's hand, it remains gold, but it leaves behind a vibrational blueprint of multiplication in the air. For every grain of gold she gives, 1,000 grains begin to move toward her from the invisible storehouse. She understands the alchemy that the world has forgotten, that money is not a solid object to be hoarded, but a fluid current to be directed. The act of paying a bill is not an execution of wealth. It is the sowing of the seed for a 1,000-fold harvest. The mirror of her life does not reflect a loss. It reflects a glorious, unfolding overflow. To master the alchemy of exchange, one must subject the concept of payment to a rigorous, recursive deconstruction. We must peel back the layers of societal programming and ask the foundational question: why does the emotional state of the giver dictate the mathematical return of the gift? The recursive why. The frequency of the flow. Why is money likened to water? It is because the word currency itself is derived from the Latin currere, meaning to run or to flow. In the architecture of the soul, money is a medium of spiritual energy. How does the sigh act as a dam? Recursive thinking reveals that a sigh is a physical manifestation of a contracted soul. When you sigh as you pay a bill, you are turning the radio dial of your consciousness to the frequency of subtraction. You are informing your subconscious mind that the universe is a place of scarcity where things are taken from you. Why does this stop the supply? Because the subconscious garden cannot distinguish between a tax bill and a blessing. It only hears the command. If the command is, "I am losing," the subconscious begins to prune the roots of opportunity. It blinds your eyes to the sudden breakthrough, because it believes you are in a state of retreat. To hoard money out of fear is to attempt to stop the flow of a river by building a wall of sand. The water will not stay fresh. It will stagnate, breed the mosquitoes of debt, and eventually evaporate. The philosophy of the thousandfold return. How does the blessing trigger multiplication? Philosophically, the act of blessing a payment is an act of sovereign recognition. You are acknowledging that you are a gateway through which the divine supply moves. Why does the law respond with more? Recursive logic suggests that the infinite substance seeks the path of least resistance. It flows toward the vessel that remains open. When you pay with joy, you signal to the law that you have enough and to spare. You prove your stewardship. The universe, seeing an open and joyous channel, directs more current toward you because it knows you will not dam the flow. You become a distributor for the king, and the king always ensures his distributors are the best funded citizens of the realm. The radio dial of exchange. Most people live in the static of regret. They pay their rent with a shadow of resentment, their utilities with an echo of frustration. They are unknowingly using the shuttle of their words to weave a garment of poverty. The alchemist, however, uses the radio dial to tune into the broadcast of abundance. She understands that the mirror of reality is always 3 steps behind the heart. If she wants the mirror to show her a surplus, she must first feel the surplus in the moment of the expenditure. She treats the electric bill not as a burden, but as a love letter from the universe, thanking her for the light in her home and the warmth in her walls. By blessing the exchange, she recalibrates the atmosphere of her life to the frequency of multiplication. In a kingdom where the ghost of logic reigned supreme and the drought of the spirit had turned the people into bitter hoarders, there lived a weaver named Elara. She was a woman of delicate skill, yet she lived in a small cottage where the echoes of not enough rattled the windows every night. Elara had spent her life as a seeker. She saved every copper, counting her coins by the dim light of a tallow candle, her heart racing every time she had to buy wool or oil. She believed that wealth was a shy bird that would fly away if she so much as breathed too loudly. Consequently, her supply was always just enough to keep her from starving, but never enough to allow her to thrive. She was draped in a garment of fear. One winter, a royal decree was issued. A new tax was to be collected to fund the king's great cathedral. For the townspeople, this was a catastrophe. They screamed at the tax collectors, they hid their gold in the dirt, they signed contracts of lack with every angry word they spoke. Elara, however, had recently discovered the forgotten architectural secret. She stood before her mirror of truth and saw a woman who was tired of being a beggar. She decided to perform a radical act of pattern interruption. When the tax collector arrived at her door, Elara did not hide. She did not sigh. She had saved 10 silver coins, her entire reserve for the winter. She took the coins and polished them until they shone like scouts of abundance. As she placed them into the collector's heavy iron box, she did not look at the emptiness of her own purse. She looked at the collector's heavy eyes and said with a quiet, fierce tenderness, "I bless this silver. It goes to build a house of light, and it returns to me 1,000-fold from the storehouse of the divine." The collector, used to curses and tears, was stunned. He felt a sudden warmth in his hands. He marked her name in the ledger with a flourish. The next 48 hours were the valley of shadows for Elara. The neighbors whispered that she was a fool. The ghost of logic told her she would freeze without her silver. But Elara remained unmoved. Every time her heart began to race, she used the quickening of the heart. She looked at her loom and thanked the universe for the threads she had. She looked at her hearth and thanked the law for the wood. On the morning of the 3rd day, the 72nd hour, a carriage emblazoned with the royal seal pulled up to her cottage. It was not the tax collector. It was the king's master of robes. The silver Elara had given had been used to pay the artisans at the cathedral, and the collector had mentioned the sovereign woman whose touch had made the silver feel like living light. The king, hearing this, desired a tapestry for the high altar. a work that required a weaver who understood the soul of the fabric. He did not offer her silver. He offered her gold. He offered her a limitless supply of the finest silk and a salary that made her winter reserve look like a grain of sand. Alara's supply had been certain and sudden because she had refused to let the shadow of payment darken her spirit. She had turned a tax into a seed, and the law had no choice but to deliver the harvest. To embody the alchemy of exchange today, you must transform every transaction of your life into a sacred ritual. You are no longer a consumer. You are a circulator of divine substance. The practice of the alchemist. The blessing of the bill. Take a physical or digital bill that currently causes you anxiety. Look at it not as a demand, but as a witness of supply. Before you pay it, place your hand over your heart and say, "I am grateful for the service this represents. As I release this currency, it returns to me 1,000-fold, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." The silent command. Every time you tap your card, click Purchase, or hand over cash today, silently whisper, "This returns to me 1,000-fold, from the storehouse of the divine." Never let money leave your hand with a sigh. If you cannot pay with a blessing, wait until you have recalibrated your radio dial. The scout recognition. When you receive change, find a penny on the street, or see a discount on a receipt, treat it as a small witness of the 1,000-fold return. Bless the scout and say, "I recognize the current. My supply is sudden." When you give from a place of peace, you signal to your own nervous system that you are a woman of overflow. You tell the law that you have enough to share, and the law responds by giving you more to distribute. If this teaching has shifted your frequency from contraction to expansion, I invite you to support this sanctuary through the Super Thanks button. This is your moment of exchange, an intentional act of sowing into the field that feeds your soul. You have learned to plant the seed, to survive the shadows, and to circulate the harvest. Your vessel is now open and ordered. But as the golden current begins to fill your life, you will encounter the final and most stubborn architectural error. It is the chain of the debtor, the lingering belief that you are still owed, or that you owe the world. In the next chapter, the dissolution of debt, we will learn why a debt is merely a mental anchor and how the frequency of the air can cause even the most massive financial obligations to suddenly evaporate into the morning mist. The currents are flowing. The alchemy is working. Now, let us break the final chains. In the subterranean depths of the human psyche, there exists a vault that requires no physical key, yet its doors remain more impenetrable than the thickest steel of a sovereign reserve. Within this vault, a woman stands motionless, her wrists and ankles bound by chains of ancient rusted iron. Each link in these chains is etched with a numerical ghost, a figure, a date, a signature on a dotted line. The weight of these shackles is so immense that she has forgotten the sensation of the earth beneath her feet. She knows only the crushing gravity of the ode. The paradox of this prison is chilling. The chains are not made of metal, but of memory. They are forged from the echo of a past moment where she accepted a blueprint of lack. The iron is not cold because of the cellar's air, but because of the radio dial of her soul, which has been locked for a decade on the frequency of the debtor. She carries the weight of a mountain, yet if she were to reach out and touch the links, her hand would pass through them like smoke. They are shadows cast by a sun she has turned her back upon, yet to her they are the only reality. Then, a singular, impossible event occurs. A shaft of light, the divine spark, pierces the darkness of the vault. As the light touches the iron, the atmosphere begins to vibrate with the resonance of the threefold command. The observer watches as the heavy, rusted links do not break, but undergo a total transubstantiation. The iron softens, losing its jagged edges and its suffocating weight. It turns to shimmering, iridescent silk, and then, with a final musical shimmer, it evaporates into a fine golden mist. The woman stands in the center of the vault, her limbs light, her breath expansive. The numerical ghosts have vanished. The vault door swings open of its own accord. The transition is complete, not because a payment was made in the world of shadows, but because the identity of the prisoner was dissolved in the light of the sovereign. To understand the dissolution of debt, one must apply the recursive thinking method to the very concept of owing. We must strip away the social and economic layers and ask the foundational question, Why does a numerical obligation in the physical world possess the power to anchor a soul in a state of permanent lack? The recursive why. The identity of the debtor. Why is debt so difficult to erase? It is not because of the interest rates or the legal contracts. It is because the individual has accepted the debtor as their primary identity. In the architecture of the soul, the subconscious mind is a perfect mirror. If the woman stands before the mirror of truth and sees herself as someone who owes, the universe is legally bound to provide her with more things to owe for. How does this anchor work? Every time a bill is opened with a sigh of dread, or a balance is checked with a shiver of fear, the radio dial is fine-tuned to the frequency of the slave. Recursive logic reveals that debt is simply a contract of the past that is being continuously renewed in the present. You are not paying for a car or a house. You are paying for the belief that you did not have the supply at the moment of need. To the universe, there is no past. There is only the now. If you are vibrating in the now as a person who lacks, the infinite substance remains locked in its unformed state. The philosophy of the air. How do we dissolve the anchor? We must move from the frequency of the debtor to the frequency of the heir. An heir does not earn their inheritance, nor do they owe for it. They simply possess it by right of birth. How does this dissolve physical debt? Philosophically, debt is a shadow. A shadow cannot be fought with a sword. It can only be removed by changing the position of the light. When the radio dial is switched to limitless supply, the old story of debt becomes a vibrational mismatch. The universe cannot hold a debt against a woman who no longer possesses the identity of a debtor. Just as a bird cannot be held by a cage made of water, the physical world cannot hold a debt against a soul that has fully accepted its divine inheritance. The echo of the debt must eventually fade, because the cause of the debt, the mental blueprint of lack, has been torn up and replaced. The law of the vacuum. Recursive thinking further reveals that the universe abhors a vacuum. Debt is a false filling of a vacuum that should be filled by the divine supply. When you bless the debt, as discussed in previous chapters, you are not blessing the lack. You are acknowledging that the supply is already present and moving through the vessel. You are informing the quantum field that the channel is open. The moment the mind is debt-free, meaning it no longer recognizes the power of the numerical ghost, the physical debt is forced into a state of sudden dissolution. It must drop off, for it no longer has a hook in the consciousness. Consider the cinematic journey of Miriam, a woman whose life was a testament to the iron chain of modern existence. Miriam was a nurse, a woman whose days were spent in the high-pressure corridors of a metropolitan hospital, healing others while she herself was being crushed by a numerical ghost of her own making. For a decade, Miriam had carried the weight of student loans, a staggering sum that felt less like a financial obligation and more like a permanent disability. Every time she received her paycheck, she did not see a reward for her labor. She saw a minus. She lived in the shadow of the ledger. When she walked the hospital halls, her posture was that of a woman carrying an invisible pack of lead. Her radio dial was perpetually tuned to the static of, "I will be paying this until I die." Miriam came to the realization that her spiritual decree was the very thing keeping the dead alive. She decided to enter the 7-2-hour Trinity Window with a radical new blueprint. The first 24 hours, the shift, Miriam did not look at her loan balance. Instead, she stood before her mirror and spoke the threefold command. But she added a specific seal. "I am a sovereign of supply. My life is already free. The shadow of debt has no anchor in my mind." She spent the day cleaning the vessel of her thoughts. When the ghost of logic whispered about the interest rates, she drowned it out with the resonance of the air. The second 48 hours, the shadow. The echo of the past struck with a vengeance. She received a standard notification from her loan servicer reminding her of an upcoming payment. In the past, this would have triggered a sigh of lack. But Miriam performed a pattern interruption. She looked at the notification and smiled. She said, "I bless this witness of my expansion. This returns to me 1,000-fold." She refused to inhabit the identity of the debtor. She walked through the hospital as if she already owned the building. She was unmoved by appearances. The 72nd hour, the dissolution. On the morning of the third day, Miriam received a letter. It was not a bill. It was a formal communication stating that due to a specific sudden administrative change in her public service district, a change she had not even heard of, a change that had been stuck in probate for years. Her remaining debt had been forgiven in its entirety. The debt didn't vanish because Miriam worked harder or because she attracted a miracle. It vanished because she had successfully dissolved the anchor in her own mind. Her frequency had shifted to a floor of the building where debtors were not allowed. The physical world, being a perfect mirror, had no choice but to reflect her new state of freedom. The administrative change was merely the furniture being rearranged by the universe to match her internal decree. Miriam was free because she had first dared to be free in the invisible. To embody the dissolution of debt today, you must perform a sovereign audit of your own chains. You must stop fighting the shadow and start illuminating the vessel. The practice of the heir. The divorce from the ledger. For the next 24 hours, do not look at your debt balances. Do not calculate the interest. These acts are renewals of the contract. Instead, view your debts as temporary shadows that are already in the process of evaporating. The inventory of the heir. Make a list of 3 things you would do, how you would walk, and how you would breathe if your debts were already dissolved. Then, begin to do those 3 things now. This is the posture of the sovereign. You are informing the quantum field that the debtor is dead. The blessing of the signature. If you must make a payment today, do it with the majesty of a queen. Do not let the money leave your hand with a sigh. Whisper, "This is a seed sown into the field of my infinite freedom. My supply is certain, sudden, and limitless." When you give from a place of peace, you signal to your own nervous system that you are a woman of overflow. You tell the law that you have enough to share, and the law responds by giving you more to distribute. If you are ready to witness the sudden dissolution of your own anchors, I invite you to support this sanctuary through the Super Thanks button. This is your sacred vow in physical form, a declaration that you are an heir to the divine storehouse, and your supply is no longer a matter of struggle, but of law. The anchors are lifting. The silk ribbons are evaporating. You have reclaimed your identity as the sovereign of supply. You are no longer a victim of a dry economy or a numerical ghost. You have moved into the final sanctuary. But as the chains fall away, a final and most majestic truth awaits. You have learned to command the supply, to survive the shadows, and to dissolve the debt. Now, you must learn to live in the eternal current. There is a way of being where the 7-2-hour window is no longer a practice, but a permanent state of existence where you are the lighthouse that never flickers, and the tide of abundance never recedes. In our final chapter, The Sovereign's Eternal Current, we will weave all the secrets together into a single, unbreakable golden thread. We will learn how to maintain the frequency as a lifestyle, and we will issue the final vow that establishes your dominion forever. The vault is empty. The world is waiting. The current is calling you home. High atop a jagged promontory of ancient sun-bleached stone, a solitary lighthouse stands as a monument to the immutable. Below it, the ocean. The vast, primordial, infinite substance is a chaotic theater of motion. The tides roar and recede, driven by the unseen gravity of distant moons. The waves crash with the fury of 1,000 storms, only to vanish into the froth of the shore. To the sailor lost in the fog, the ocean is a capricious god, a force of luck and peril that provides or withholds at its own whim. But the lighthouse does not participate in the tumult. It does not lean into the wind to catch the light, nor does it descend the cliff to chase the receding tide. It is the cinematic paradox of the stationary power. The less it moves, the more it commands the horizon. Its beacon, a steady rotating pulse of gold, does not seek the ships. It informs the ships of where the shore resides. It is not a seeker of the current. It is the master of the frequency. The wise observer notes a profound spiritual irony. Most souls live their lives as the storm-tossed ship, frantically adjusting their sails to the shadows of the economy, the echoes of the job market, and the tremors of time. They believe that if they struggle harder against the waves, they will eventually reach the treasury. But the master architect understands that the only way to govern the ocean is to become the lighthouse. When the soul enters the eternal current, it ceases to be a victim of the ebb and flow of the physical world. It realizes that the tide of abundance is not an external event that arrives once a year. It is an internal pulse that is always present, waiting for a stationary, sovereign observer to recognize its rhythm. The sovereign does not manifest wealth. She becomes the coordinate around which wealth has no choice but to coalesce. To transition from the 7-2-hour window into an eternal lifestyle, one must apply a rigorous, recursive autopsy to the nature of sustainability. We must peer into the gears of the soul and ask the final, foundational questions. Why does the manifestation often fade once the crisis has passed? And how does one maintain the frequency of the king's treasury when the world is broadcasting a recession? The recursive why, the home frequency. Why do most practitioners find themselves back in the basement of lack after a breakthrough? It is because they treated the law of supply as an emergency exit rather than a home. Recursive thinking reveals that the subconscious mind has a home frequency, a default setting on the radio dial to which it returns the moment the sovereign stops paying attention. If the default setting is, "I am a person who needs miracles," the universe will perpetually provide situations that require miracles, keeping the soul in a state of permanent seeking. How do we permanently recalibrate the home frequency? By understanding that the mirror of reality does not just reflect your thoughts, it reflects your assumptions. An assumption is a thought that has become so dense it functions as an environment. The sovereign must move past trying to believe and enter the state of divine assumption, the philosophy of the cause and the effect. In the architecture of the void, there is only one cause, the spirit. Everything else, the bank balance, the contract, the sudden check, is the effect. Why is this distinction critical? Because most people attempt to use the effect to change the cause. They wait for the money to arrive so they can feel abundant. But the infinite substance is perfectly literal. If you broadcast waiting, it provides more waiting. To live in the eternal current, one must master the recursive loop of sovereignty. Recognition. Acknowledging that the golden mist is the only reality. Assumption. Acting, breathing, and walking as if the supply is already a historical fact. Indifference to the shadow. Looking at a minus in the physical world and recognizing it as a delayed echo of a past self that no longer exists. How does this create a lifestyle? When the sovereign stays in the posture for long enough, the nervous system undergoes a transubstantiation. It loses the capacity to vibrate in fear. The radio dial becomes locked. The lighthouse no longer has to try to shine. It simply is the light. At this stage, the sudden becomes the constant. Supply moves toward the sovereign not because she called it, but because her frequency has made her the inevitable destination for all wealth. In the heart of a city that had once been a titan of industry, but had since fallen into the fog of fatigue, lived a woman named Sarah. The city was a landscape of shuttered mills and rusted gears, where the collective radio dial was tuned to a single, mournful broadcast. The glory has departed. The people walked with hunched shoulders, the posture of the defeated, and spoke in whispers of the ghost of logic that said no new work would ever come. Sarah owned a small textile studio on the edge of the industrial district. While her neighbors boarded up their windows and grumbled about the drying up of the economy, Sarah did something that the world called madness. She did not lower her prices. She did not trim her staff. Instead, she entered her sanctuary of presence. She painted her door a vibrant royal gold, a pattern interruption for the gray street. Every morning she stood in the center of her shop and spoke the threefold command, not for herself, but for the building, the looms, and the very air. The supply of this house is certain. The supply of this house is sudden. The supply of this house is limitless. 1 month into the Great Contraction, Sarah's largest client declared bankruptcy. The trimmer of time whispered that she should panic. The ghost of logic told her to lay off her weavers. But Sarah stood at her mirror of truth. She looked past the shadow of the bankruptcy and saw the infinite substance that was already rearranging itself to fill the vacuum. She blessed the bankrupt client, releasing the echo of debt, and then she performed a quickening. She took her remaining reserve and bought the finest, most expensive silk threads she could find. "Why buy silk when no one is buying?" her head weaver asked, his voice trembling with the fog of fatigue. "Because," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the majesty of a queen, "we are not weaving for the city of shadows, we are weaving for the sovereign current. God is our supply, and that supply is immediate." She spent the next week cleaning the vessel, organizing the threads, and ensuring the looms were polished until they shone like mirrors. She and her weavers worked in the posture of the sovereign, even when no orders were on the books. On the morning of the 14th day, a motor car, unlike any seen in that gray city, pulled up to the golden door. Inside was a representative from a premier fashion house in a distant capital. They had been searching for a mill that still possessed the mastery of the old world, a mill that hadn't succumbed to the cheapening of the current. They had seen the golden door and felt the hum of the building's frequency. They didn't just want a contract. They wanted to buy Sarah's entire output for the next 3 years. The recession continued for the rest of the city, but within the walls of Sarah's mill, it was as if the 1930s had never happened. She had built a frequency island. She had proved that the supply truck doesn't care about the state of the roads. It only cares about the signal of the destination. Sarah didn't survive the crisis. She dissolved it by refusing to recognize its authority. The journey of the master content architect has reached its celestial conclusion. You have moved from the architecture of the void to the eternal current. You have seen the mirrors, survived the shadows, and dissolved the debt. Now, you must take the final step that seals your sovereignty forever. The ritual of the final vow. I invite you now to find your mirror one last time. This is no longer a mirror of hope, but a mirror of establishment. Stand tall. Roll your shoulders back. Feel the silver thread pulling you toward your divine inheritance. Breathe in the golden mist that is now your permanent atmosphere. Look directly into your pupils and speak this final sovereign vow with the authority of a being who has reached the end of all seeking. I am a sovereign of supply. I no longer seek my good. My good seeks me. I am the cause. The world is the effect. My supply is certain, my supply is sudden, and my supply is limitless. It is finished, it is manifest, and I am the heir to the infinite. Amen. Observe the shift in the room. The great silence is now filled with the hum of the divine current. You are no longer waiting for the world to change. You have changed, and therefore the world has no choice but to follow your lead. You have reached the threshold of your reclamation. This teaching is now woven into your cellular memory. If you have felt the quickening of your soul during these 10 chapters, I invite you to make your mark on the physical world. Leave a final comment below. I am a sovereign of supply. My eternal current begins now. Subscribe to this channel to remain in this sanctuary of transformation, for we are building a community of women who lead from the inside out. And if you understand that the act of sowing is the ultimate act of the harvest, your super thanks is the final seal on your contract of overflow. As you step away from this manuscript and back into the world of appearances, do not be deceived by the old echoes. You are the lighthouse. The ocean of substance is at your feet. Every person you meet is a messenger. Every doorway is an arrival. Every bill is a blessing. The 7-2-hour window has become the eternal now. The weaving is complete. The contract is signed in light. The sovereign has ascended her throne. And so it is established, and so it is done.